South Asia, the region of the Indian subcontinent seen here in this satellite view, was once a remote and fabulous corner of the world, celebrated for its intractable climate, its extremes of wealth and poverty, its bizarre cults and mysterious religious teachings. Now the countries of South Asia are an easy jet flight away, and increasing numbers of Westerners find it possible to visit India, Pakistan, Nepal. Students dive beneath the fables and stereotypes to learn classical and vernacular languages, music, art, philosophies, the social and political systems of South Asia. And a few of the region's myriad cults, philosophies, and spiritual techniques have missionized and taken root in the West. Yet many of the fundamentals of South Asian religions seem to us as elusive and bewildering as ever. It is these fundamentals, articulate in the contemporary experience of Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Jains, and Christians of South Asia, that we are about to explore. My name is David Knipe. My profession is the history of religions. I would like to have you join me for an exploration into the religious worlds of the peoples of South Asia. We have in our series 15 half-hour programs, each a venture into the mythical, ritual, and symbolic expressions of one of 5 great religions. For 4 of our 15 programs, guest specialists will appear. Stephen Beyer for 2 programs on Buddhism, Muhammad Umar Memon for Islam in South Asia, and George L. Hart III and Velcheru Narayana Rao for Hinduism in South India. By way of introduction, let us imagine together the area of our interest, South Asia. South Asia is the region of the Indian subcontinent topped by the Himalaya mountains and flanked by the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. Today it includes a number of modern countries, fragments of the ancient civilization of India, ranged about the nation of India itself, with Afghanistan and Pakistan on the west, Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan on the north, Bangladesh on the east, and Sri Lanka or Ceylon on the south. About 750 million people live in South Asia, more than the combined populations of Europe and the Soviet Union. And about 75% of the total live in India. These people represent a wide range of ethnic groups. Their economies vary from primitive hunting-gathering communities to pastoral nomads to village agriculturalists to urban specialists. They speak well over 100 different languages from 4 different language families. It is a region of enormous contrasts of land and of climate, contrasts of habitat, of wealth, per capita income in these underdeveloped countries, still under $100 annually, contrasts of social standing, of family organization, of education, with literacy averaging about 20% of the total population, contrasts of occupation. With such ethnic, social, linguistic, and economic diversity, we may not be surprised at the seemingly infinite variety of religious expressions. South Asia is the homeland of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and numerous tribal religions, and the adopted home of Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism, or the religion of the Parsis. In 3 of the countries we have mentioned, Hinduism predominates. India is 83% Hindu, Nepal 90%, Sikkim 67%. Islam is dominant in 3 other countries, Pakistan is 97% Muslim, Bangladesh 80%, Afghanistan 90%, and Islam is the official religion in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Buddhism is the majority faith in the remaining two countries. Sri Lanka, or Ceylon, is 67% Buddhist, and Bhutan is 75%. Christians are found as a minority in all of these countries, but are concentrated, for the most part, in large communities in South India and Sri Lanka. Jains are located almost exclusively in India, clustered largely in urban centers of western, northwestern, and central India. Relative proportions of India's complex religious makeup may be seen here, with the Hindu majority in yellow, the Muslim minority in green, followed by Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, and others in relative numbers. But these labels, these statistics, these static scenes of traditional architecture tell us little of the complexity and interactivity of these religions, nor do they prepare us for the barrage of sights, sounds, and symbols that overwhelm us at every turn in South Asia. For a few minutes, let us absorb something of the incredible tangle of religious activity that we shall attempt to unravel during the course of this series.
कि हमसे बयान कर दे कि इसके औसाफ क्या हो, यानी उसके सिफ़त क्या हो, कमाल क्या हो उसके, क्योंकि हमको इस बैल में कदर इश्तबा है और हम ज़रूर इंशाअल्लाह ताला आपकी बात ठीक समझ जानेंगे। यानी अभी हमें शक है, शुबा है, और अब अगर अपने रब से कहकर अब की बार हमें बतला रहे तो हम इंशाअल्लाह समझ जाएंगे। क़ाल क़ाल इन्नहु यक़ूलु इन्नहा बक़रतुन ला ज़लूलुन तुसीरु।
ओम नमो अरिहंताणं। ओम नमो सेताणं। ओम नमो आयर्याणं। ओम नमो वज्रायाणं। नमो लोये सवसाहुणम्। ऐसो पंच नमोकारो सौपा।
How shall we find order in this montage of myths, rites, symbols, and speculations that South Asia affords? How shall we approach these religions? To begin with, there are certain concepts and configurations which, if not universal, are widely shared. I would like to sketch 4 such configurations. First, there is an enduring folk basis for the religions of South Asia. Between 80 and 90% of the populations of these 8 countries is a peasant population. These people are literally in touch with grassroots traditions, with profound awareness of cosmic rhythms, of divine and demonic powers alive in the elements, in plants and animals, in supernatural beings. They are aware of the continuities between cosmic and human forms, and divination, astrology, magic are a part of the workaday world of their villages, whether the rubric of the faith is Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity. We must be aware of the interactivity of the great, the classical, the literary traditions with the folk, the popular, the village level. As an example of the pervasiveness of the popular tradition in Islam, one might cite the common practice of the veneration of saints, the tombs of saints and mystics. There is no Quranic authority for such, and yet here we are served with a vivid reminder of the victory of popular faith over establishment doctrine. Secondly, the world view of the peoples of South Asia is largely that of samsara, a belief in the continued existence of an individual through a cycle of existences and the position of his life in that cycle is determined by his own past actions, his karman. Thirdly, there is a religious basis for society found in such classical Indian expressions as varnashrama dharma, literally the dharma, the cosmic law of varna, social class, and ashrama, the stage through which an individual passes in life. Ancient Indian society understood that the inequities of history, of human society, are divinely ordained, are in fact part of a divine creation, so that the three upper classes, the brahmana or priest, the kshatriya or warrior, and vaishya or producer, make a community of the twice-born classes with a complement, an inferior class, the shudras or servants, beneath. What is known as the jati or caste system emerged over the last 2,000 years as a complex group of hundreds of hereditary caste groups based upon marriage and interdining prohibitions and purity pollution scales. Despite the professions of Reform Hinduism, of Islam, Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity, the Sikh tradition, each of these perpetuates in its own way caste exclusiveness. Thirdly, or lastly rather, there is the understanding of the religious basis of the individual. And if we turn to the same term, varnashrama dharma, we find a structure of the individual in process. For ancient India, again, understood the progress of an individual through stages of life, upward from that stage of the brahmacharin, the Vedic student, to the married householder, the grihastha, to the wandering mendicant, the forest ascetic, the vanaprasthan. And finally, we have a transcendent ideal beyond these three stages, that of the sannyasin, who represents the liberation, the ideal of liberation from the manifest world. The ascetic ideal, of course, became the organizational model for both Jainism and Buddhism. This understanding of a path from this life, this existence, toward a transcendent ideal is really the lifeblood of South Asian religions and leads to an endless experimentation and the renovation of old forms, the development of new, so that we are led to that paradox of religions where everything seems the same and everything seems made afresh. To reiterate then, these four configurations, the endurance of a folk tradition, the existence of the continued existence in the worldview of samsara, the religious basis of society being a divinely ordained class and caste exclusiveness, and finally, the religious basis or definition of man being an experimental individualism with personal quests for salvation. These ordering principles may be useful when we turn to the difficult task of defining Hinduism, a religion without a founder, without a creed or mandatory rites or canonical texts or organizational authority. We must turn to the Hindu villager and his awareness of fields of force in his universe. We must be sensitive to the integrative scope of a religion that recognizes manifestations of the sacred in trees and stones, in animals and plants, as well as in ancient heroes, saints, and living god-men. Every conceivable dimension of time and space is potentially sacred for Hinduism. We must give consideration to aspects of Hinduism that have been little studied, such as women's rights and the religiously cohesive roles of women in Hindu society. From the most basic rite or symbol to such myth-ritual complexities as tantric yoga, our efforts will be to comprehend the universality of living Hinduism. 3 separate programs of our series will be devoted to studying the sectarian traditions of Hinduism, the mythology and folklore, iconography, individual worship and temple worship, festival routines and devotional attitudes toward, first, Lord Vishnu and the many incarnations of Vishnu that make up the Vaishnava pantheon, with particular attention to Vishnu's manifestations as Rama and Krishna, 2 of the most loved and honored deities in the long history of Hinduism, And secondly, Lord Shiva, again surveying the mythical history, rites, and symbols, temples, shrines, and festivals of the Shaiva tradition, where we shall attempt to discover how it is that this strange wilderness deity has transcended all polarities, including his own manifestations as erotic lover on one hand and renunciant ascetic on the other. The sadhus that follow him and the wider family of the god, including Ganesha, his elephant-headed son, will also be discussed. Thirdly, we shall examine the age-old traditions of the goddess in South Asia, from prehistoric mother goddess and vegetation goddess cults to the manifoldly ambivalent goddesses of Hinduism, the mothers who graciously give life and ruthlessly take it away, always displaying that feminine energy that motivates the material cosmos. We shall seek to understand the persistent strength of the goddess in her mythology and iconography, in tantric and other forms of worship, in modern incarnations of the goddess, in forms of ecstatic possession, and in numerous festivals and folk traditions. One of our approaches to the study of living Hinduism will be through the domestic rites of transition, life cycle rites that carry an individual from conception, birth, and childhood through initiation into responsible adulthood and full participation in the ritual life, and in the highest caste responsibility for perpetuating the ancient texts. Marriage is a universally observed structure of these rites of passage, as is the final transition, death, whether the ceremonies are those of cremation, the final fire sacrifice, or of burial, an offering into the earth, with the subsequent highly complex ancestral offerings that emphasize the responsibility of the living for several generations of deceased ancestors and hold out the hope of sustenance and security in the cycle of rebirths. Another approach to our survey of Hinduism will be through the phenomenon of the pilgrimage. Why do millions of Hindus take long, strenuous, and costly journeys to certain locations? Some of these places ancient, long-famous temple towns, others so modest as to be unknown to all but regional devotees. What is it that renders a town, a river, a tree sacred? What do these pilgrims do on the journey, and upon reaching their goal, the sacred space itself? Still another focus of our attention to Hinduism will be the nature of traditions in South India, a region in many ways distinct from the North by virtue of its separate family of languages, its ancient literatures, its social structures, and particularly of interest to us, its religious conceptions of order and power, of ambiguous cosmic energies that are manifest in woman, in fertility, in death. Unique South Indian expressions in temple architecture and iconography, in priestly traditions, in deities and forms of worship accorded to them will be explored. Now, all of this diversity in Hinduism allows us to understand the complexity and the range of our series when we understand that South Asia has many religions, many traditions that are themselves the results of centuries of dialogues concerning the meaning of existence and paths and techniques to salvation or enlightenment. One of our programs will concern the cult following of a contemporary guru in India, a god-man who teaches an eclectic philosophy drawn from various Asian religions and who advocates a technique of Sufi whirling and various dynamic meditations for his followers. This program will enable us to raise several questions about South Asian religions generally. For example, what are the roles of the teacher, the guru, in effecting a transformation upon an individual or upon a community? What is it that makes him a spiritual master? What is the place of ecstasy and possession in individual transformation and salvation? What is it that draws hundreds of Americans and Europeans to become devotees of this guru and dozens more like him? Jainism, a religion of few numbers but great historic influence, has maintained for 2,500 years the presence of an ascetic ideal. We shall observe the rigorous traditions of the monks and nuns as well as those of the laity, learn something of the great Jaina saints of antiquity, the teachings of Jaina doctrines about the soul and its potential liberation, Jaina domestic and temple rites, festivals, and pilgrimage, and something of the contributions in philosophy, literature, art, and architecture. Buddhism developed in the same period as Jainism and the two religions shared much the same worldview, understanding existence itself as suffering, and proposing stringent ethical codes and monastic disciplines as cures for that suffering. We shall range from the life of the Buddha as a twofold model of enlightenment and compassion, down to the remarkable revivals of Buddhism in parts of India today. Himalayan Buddhism, the Buddhism of Tibet and Nepal, will raise other questions for us. For example, what is the relationship between the indigenous folk religion of Tibet and the literary traditions of Buddhism imported from India? What is the importance of reincarnation, of the sectarian divisions in ecclesiastical organization? What are the rituals and the skills learned by the monks? Islam, youngest of the major South Asian religions, will provide opportunity to relate Muslim faith and practice, to observe tradition of prayer in the mosque, for example, and then to take up the distinctive features of Islam in South Asia, the beliefs and practices the Sufis have contributed, the cults of saint worship, the interactivity of Muslim and Hindu devotionalism, the special festivals, architectural contributions of South Asian Islam. Christianity will also gain our attention as we survey the three major Christian traditions, the Syrian Christians, the Roman Catholics, and the Protestants, considering their historical development, including missionary movements from Europe and from America, their rites, doctrines, and educational systems, their institutional expressions unique to Indian Christianity, such as interfaith communion services performed in Sanskrit with Hindu worship patterns. Change is everywhere in evidence in South Asia, with increasing modernization and urbanization, change that necessarily erodes many of the social and religious values and structures of traditional cultures. Traditional class and caste hierarchies, especially in urban areas, are changing, with upward caste mobility a constant pressure. Women, too, are realizing greater mobility, fewer traditional restrictions, although village ways are slow to change. Many basic age-old religious practices, the Hindu cremation rite, for example, are found to be too time-consuming, too expensive, too traditional for the modern world. And this unceremonious electric crematorium is gaining favor among some urban Hindus for speedier annihilation. This boy may be among those who find that educational and occupational duties take precedence over the traditional demands of his faith, and he may lose track of that faith. He will be visible, especially if well-educated, but his will be a minority expression. Traditional values still endure vigorously in hundreds of towns and in the nearly 1 million villages that are sprinkled across the South Asian landscapes. The expressions of these religions are a vast and ancient spiritual legacy, not just for South Asians, but for all mankind. It is a legacy well worth exploring. As Gandhi once said, motivated out of his lifetime effort in the attempt to mitigate the injustices and ignorance and intolerance of this world, if you cannot believe the other faith is as true as yours, you should at least believe the other people are as true as you.